I have always tried to be a good daughter, and not only because this was expected of me from childhood as some kind of indisputable truth embedded in the very essence of my existence, but also because the role of the ideal kind responsible girl, who can be set as an example, was firmly entrenched for me in our large and noisy family, where expectations were always exceeded. Opportunities and frustrations were expressed not in words but in heavy silence. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. This is what everyone expects from Jada, a successful marketing specialist, smart, balanced, not subject to violent emotions, a woman who never married or had children, despite numerous tips, hints, nudges and direct questions, which over the years became more intrusive and harsh, as if my status was unmarried and childless. 30 years old was a personal insult to the whole family. Unlike my older brothers and sisters, Mateo and Aurora, who have long had their own families, children, mortgages, jobs, and eternal fatigue on their faces, they, in their own words, barely make ends meet, although it seems to me that sometimes they even like to play this role of martyrs. Victims of everyday life, victims of circumstances, always straightened in means, but at the same time supposedly more real than me, with their designer bags, evening glasses of wine and freedom, which they call loneliness with envious sarcasm. My name is Jada. I am 30 years old, and I have been working for the same marketing firm for 8 years now, firmly occupying my place in a world where KPIs are more important than emotions, and success is measured by numbers and reports and bonuses in the account. 3 years ago, I was promoted to senior manager, and with this promotion came not only a raise in salary, but also a new wave of expectations from my family. Those who had previously treated me with mild pity now began to treat me with veiled demands. Jada can pay for it, she's rich. This phrase became the leitmotif of all family conversations, delivered with such casual confidence that sometimes it seemed to me that my credit card was in their pocket. For 3 years now, I've been sending my parents $1,500 a month to cover the costs of groceries, utilities, and all sorts of small things that accumulate in the list sent to me in messages from my father. They have never openly thanked me for this, not because they were not grateful, I believe in it, but because, in their opinion, this is my duty for not living the way they dreamed, and not giving them grandchildren with whom it would be nice to go for a walk in the park on Sundays. For 2 weeks now, I had been preparing for my mother's 60th birthday, a round date that seemed like it should have been a reason for joy and celebration, but instead turned into a nervous, anxious expectation for me, as if I had to take an important exam in front of the strictest examiner. I wanted to do something special for her, something that would break out of the banal gifts and show her how much she means to me. 6 months ago, I bought a small country house, initially considering it solely as an investment, a cozy one-bedroom apartment with a green backyard framed by old trees and lush shrubs, where the scent of blooming lilacs must be wafted in the spring months. As I paid off my mortgage, I thought more and more often that this house could be the perfect place for her quiet, measured retirement, which she so often talked about in our Sunday conversations on the phone. When her voice became dreamy and soft, "I just want a quiet place where your father and we would like to enjoy our golden years." I listened and knew that this house could be the place. I prepared a small gift box, enclosing the documents for the house, neatly tied with a ribbon, and a handwritten letter explaining my plan to transfer the property to her in full as soon as I closed the mortgage. I also put in some printed photos, a charming facade with a wooden veranda, a spacious kitchen with granite countertops and windows flooding the room with light, a cozy bedroom with a bay window overlooking the back garden. I imagined how she would open the box, how her face would light up with surprise, and then, maybe, tears, this time from joy. I wanted to see in her eyes not criticism or pretension, not fatigue and irritation, but gratitude, warm, real, the one I've been waiting for almost all my life. 3 days before her birthday, Mom called to remind me about the party we were going to have at home, not at the restaurant, as I suggested, but in their old kitchen, because, as Mom said, your Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Ricardo don't want to go to the restaurant. They are too old for this nonsense. "It's okay, Mom, I'll be there," I promised, holding back a slight irritation, and then she added with that special pride in her voice that I didn't hear often, "Mateo and Aurora got together and bought me a car." Can you imagine? A whole car. My stomach clenched. That's wonderful, I whispered. What are you going to give me? What is it? She asked bluntly. It's a surprise, I replied, trying to sound mysterious rather than defensive. She snorted. I expect something special from you, Jada. After all, you're making good money. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the empty cup and feeling a sense of emptiness creep inside. Still, I shrugged off the weight, because I was going to give her a home, a real home, a place where she could be happy. On the morning of her birthday, I went into a flower salon and chose the most luxurious bouquet of her favorite pink roses, white lilies, and light airy gypsophila. It cost almost $200, but I wanted everything to be perfect. Then I took the box from the chest of drawers where I had been storing it all this time and headed to my parents' house, where the first guests were already gathering, and the aroma of baked pasta and homemade wine was in the air. When I arrived, the party was already in full swing. The driveway in front of the house was packed with cars, whose mirrors sparkled in the sunlight, and from the slightly open windows of the house came joyful laughter, the clink of dishes and the hum of voices, woven into one continuous stream of celebration, where each guest seemed to be part of a well-rehearsed scene. I was holding a bouquet in one hand, carefully wrapped in a transparent film, from which the fresh scent of roses and lilies flowed, and in the other, that very small box wrapped in silver paper and tied with a delicate blue ribbon, which contained everything that I had been preparing for so long, everything that I had pinned so much hope and which I thought my mom had been waiting for all her life, even if she didn't admit it out loud. When I pressed the bell, the door opened almost immediately, and my father appeared on the threshold, whose figure still retained the same straightness despite the years, and his face lit up with a soft smile as he exclaimed, "Oh, Jada, you're here." Everyone had already arrived, and he stepped aside to let me in with that leisurely gesture he always used, as if I didn't need to be reminded that I was home. Upon entering, I looked around, looking for my mother, and almost immediately noticed her in the dining room. She was standing, slightly leaning over the table, arranging dishes, straightening napkins, and brushing imaginary crumbs from the snow-white tablecloth, as if everything had to be perfect, immaculate, as if this order was her power. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, coming closer and reaching out to hug her, but she barely looked up, lingering on me for a moment, and almost immediately turned away, saying, "Oh, Jada, put your things somewhere and help me with the snacks." The voice hers was intense, like a man burdened with 1,000 small worries, with no time for sentimentality. I nodded, suppressing a pang of disappointment, and went to the kitchen, where I found a vase in one of the cupboards, filled it with cold water, carefully straightened the flower stalks and took the bouquet to the living room, putting it on the coffee table so that it could be seen by everyone, hoping that Mom would notice its beauty later, when a little exhale. She came in, carrying a tray of boiled eggs, and, glancing at the bouquet, frowned. "It takes up too much space." "People will have to put down drinks," she said disapprovingly, then picked up the vase and took it to the kitchen without saying another word. I told myself that I shouldn't be offended, that she was just busy and tired, that she would definitely appreciate a real gift when the right moment came. Meanwhile, the guests were sitting down at the dining table, aunts, uncles, cousins. Everyone was talking at the same time, laughing, loudly passing dishes to each other, filling the space with warmth and familiar noise, which exuded comfort, but which that day felt a little detached from me. Mom sat at the head of the table, beaming with attention, smiling at everyone who praised her cooking, catching grateful glances and exclamations, as if absorbing them into herself as proof that she was still the main hostess, still the center of the family. After the meal, the moment I had been waiting for came, the time for gifts. Mateo and Aurora stood up, exchanging conspiratorial glances, and Mateo, in a confident voice, addressed everyone. "Mom, Dad, everyone, could you come out for a minute? We want to show you something special," Aurora added, her eyes sparkling with anticipation, and the whole family rose as if on cue, heading for the exit. Parked on the lawn in front of the house was a new silver sedan, not luxurious, but not cheap either, with a huge scarlet bow tied to the hood, like in an advertising picture. "Oh, my God!" Mom exclaimed, pressing her hands to her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears as she turned around to hug my brother and sister. "I can't believe you did that," she said. Her voice trembled, and everyone around began to applaud. Dad came closer and hugged Mom while someone was photographing them against the background of the car, and I was standing a little way away, still clutching my little gift box, feeling unexpectedly and painfully invisible. When everyone returned to the house, the gift-giving continued. Aunt Beatrice presented Mom with a baking dish, Uncle Ricardo handed over a gift card to her favorite department store, Cousin Tina handed over a hand-knitted scarf. All these things Mom unwrapped with theatrical delight, exclaiming loudly and wondering if each of them was a priceless artifact. Finally, it was my turn. "Jada, what have you brought?" Dad asked, and all heads turned to me. I stepped forward and, straightening up a little, handed my mother my box. "Happy birthday, Mommy," I said, trying to speak softly, with tenderness. She picked up the box, and her smile dimmed noticeably as she brought it to her and felt its weight. "That's it?" she said with a slight but distinct hint of disappointment in her voice. My heart hurt, but I nodded. "Yes, it's a surprise," I said, trying to keep my voice light, but her face had already changed. "She's so small," Mom muttered, and her disappointment became so obvious that it seemed to hang in the air. Aurora snorted. "Wow, Jada, you couldn't even afford the packaging? That's pretty stingy for someone with your salary," and her voice pierced me like a needle, right into my most vulnerable spot. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll open this later," she said, putting my gift on a side table without even unwrapping it. "Let's see what Cousin Robert has brought," she said, abruptly turning away, and I felt my insides tighten. The bouquet was ignored, and my main gift, the one I'd been thinking about for months, which I believed would touch her to the core, was simply put aside, as if it wasn't worth paying attention to. But I bit my tongue. It was her day. This is not the time to make a scene. The evening continued. The relatives presented gifts one by one: scented candles, an inexpensive blouse, obviously not her size, and my mother unwrapped each of them with unflagging enthusiasm, pouring out a stream of gratitude and approval to the givers, never returning to the silver box with a blue ribbon, which stood in the corner of the table, unopened, silent, forgotten. Meanwhile, she continued to cast disapproving glances at me, as if I had committed some monstrous, unthinkable offense, violating the unspoken code of the family, in which generosity was measured not by sincerity or depth of gesture, but by volume, and ideally, the price tag on the gift, and every glance she gave me seemed to remind me that I let her down again. I didn't justify myself. I didn't reach the level that she had set herself. Aurora, of course, did not miss an opportunity to make the situation worse. She and my mother continued to exchange glances full of silent understanding, as if in their world I was just a shadow, some kind of abstract disappointment, present solely to shade their own rightness and success, and sometimes even allowed themselves to whisper without bothering themselves. Secretive, as if my presence here is nothing more than an annoying formality. When Mom turned to me once again, giving me a look that flashed with almost physically palpable irritation, Aurora raised her voice a little louder than necessary. "Some people just don't understand what a significant birthday means," she said, without looking up from me, and her words hung in the air with such a heavy a hint that no one dared to joke or change the subject. By the middle of the day, I felt that the forced smiles, sour looks, and the pressure of misunderstanding had become unbearable, and, apologizing to my next of kin, I went outside under the pretext of getting some air and answering the call from my assistant, who wrote asking about the presentation scheduled for Monday. The cool breeze playing through the leaves of the trees cooled my flushed cheeks slightly, and for a short time I managed to pretend that I was in another world, in one where I was loved and appreciated, and my efforts were not forgotten or rejected. Returning to the house, I went to the kitchen, just to pour myself a glass of water, and it was then that my gaze accidentally fell down into the open bucket under the sink, where, among the scraps of wrapping paper and crumpled napkins, I saw her, my gift box, still neatly wrapped, with a ribbon, untouched, like in the moment I handed it to my mother, only now it was lying among the trash. Next to her, in the inglorious pile, I recognized the remains of the bouquet: crushed petals, broken stems, as if someone had forcefully pressed them inside, not bothering even with a gesture of regret. I froze, trying to process what was happening, and only one thought rang in my head: she had thrown it away. Without even opening it. My gift, my house, my letter, my photographs, everything I put my soul into was discarded as an unnecessary wrapper from something more important. "Oh, look at this," Aurora's voice sounded from behind me, and I turned to see her and Mateo in the kitchen doorway, watching me with an inexpressible expression on their faces, a mixture of satisfaction and slight mockery. "Looks like your present has been found," she continued, and Mateo added with a grin, "Let's go home." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. On the contrary, a strange, almost icy calmness gripped me, as if my body itself had built an invisible wall, protecting my mind from pain. Without a word, I walked past them, without deigning to look or gesture, went upstairs, picked up my purse, went back down and, without turning around, went out the front door, leaving behind the laughter, conversations, and walls of the house, which no longer felt like mine. Before I left, I wrote a short note, the words of which were born with difficulty, as if each of them was scratched right out of my heart. "Mom, you really should look at what was in this box before throwing it away. Jada." I attached her to the refrigerator with a magnet with the pizzeria's logo, which had been hanging there since time immemorial, knowing that it was this refrigerator she looked at every morning. Then I left without saying goodbye, without looking around, not wanting to know if they noticed my departure. Or maybe they really didn't care. Returning to my quiet apartment, I immediately kicked off my shoes, letting go of all the heavy burden of the day from my mind, and went to the bar table, pouring myself a generous glass of dark, rich Cabernet, which streamed through the glass like thick blood, and sat on the sofa, letting the silence consume me. After hours filled with fake smiles, hidden disdain, and tense exchanges of words, the silence turned out to be healing, almost gentle. I reached for my phone and opened the banking application, mechanically, as I had done hundreds of times, and looked at the scheduled automatic payment, $1,500 every month, for the past 3 years, sent to my parents, without missing a single one. The phone rang about an hour later. Mom's name popped up on the screen, and I ignored it at first. Then it rang again. And again. And again. I answered the 5th call anyway, reluctantly picking up the phone. "Hi, Jada." Her voice was envelopingly sweet, like honey, and there was no trace of the disappointment or cold criticism I'd heard earlier in the day. "Darling, why did you leave so suddenly? We were worried. And well, I've opened your present. Oh, Jada, the house. It's absolutely beautiful. These photos, your father and I are just stunned. We can't wait to see him in person." The change in her tone, abrupt, almost theatrical, made me feel sickeningly distrustful. "So you found it in the trash?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though everything was boiling inside. There was a pause. "The trash can?" No. It must be a mistake. Someone must have accidentally moved it." He sounded uncertain. "I saw it with my own eyes, Mom. My present was in the trash. Along with the flowers I brought you." "Well, that's it. It must have been some kind of misunderstanding," she hastened to add, "but now I've fixed it. The house looks absolutely perfect. Large windows in the living room. Beautiful garden." I took a long sip of wine. "I'm glad you liked the photos, Mom. Because that's all you get." "What do you mean?" Her voice was suddenly as sharp as a knife blade. "I mean, I've changed my mind," I said with that icy clarity in my voice that I hadn't even heard myself say before. "I'm not giving you the house." The pause on the other end was short but heavy, like the calm before a storm. "But you can't do that," she screamed, and the sugary tone instantly disappeared as soon as a wave of her anger found a way out. "This is my birthday present. It's already promised. You can't just change your mind." I could hear the panic in her voice, the change in intonation as she realized she was really losing something. "You threw it in the trash," I said calmly. "Remember, You didn't even know what it was. That was before I found out. Jada, she cried, don't be ridiculous. Your father and I love this house. We've already started talking about how we'll arrange the furniture, which bedroom will be ours. It's a pity, I said, surprisingly calm, as if order had finally returned to me after so many years of emotional chaos. The gift has been cancelled. You can't do this. She shouted now without any subtlety in her voice, without embellishments and masks, revealing everything that was hidden behind her caring image. I'm going to sue you. She continued, clutching at the last illusion of control. I have your note, which proves that you intended to give us the house. It's a binding promise. I laughed, loudly, sincerely, for the first time in a long time. Come on, sue me, Mom, I said. I have pictures of my present in the trash. Feel free to spend money on a lawyer, but you won't get this house. The series of obscene expressions, shouts, and accusations that followed was so intense that even my mother seemed to impress herself by pouring out everything she had accumulated. I waited until she was exhausted, like a volcano after an eruption, and spoke softly but clearly, "Goodbye, Mom." Then I hung up the phone, took another big sip of wine and, without hesitating for a second, reopened the banking application. With one last, almost solemn push, I canceled the monthly transfer of $1,500 to my parents' account. 3 years, $54,000, and finally, I severed the very financial umbilical cord that bound me to them much more tightly than I realized. The next morning, my phone literally exploded with notifications. Dozens of unread messages, missed calls, voicemails, all from my family members, each of which began with an alarming "Where are you?" And it ended with a disturbing "Why are you doing this?" I flipped through them, feeling no previous pain or fear, just a slight surprise at how quickly one can free oneself from years of oppression. Sipping coffee and looking out the window at the morning city, I sequentially blocked their rooms one by one, a process that resembled cleaning the house. Everything superfluous, everything that had long since lost its meaning, was removed without regret. Then I opened my social media profiles, reviewed my friend lists, and did the same thing there, as if I were crossing out an old chapter of my life full of expectations, duty, and silent submission. It felt like a release, almost physical. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the office last week, taking on additional projects, not giving myself a moment to doubt, knowing that now I finally belonged to myself. 2 weeks passed, without calls, without messages, without complaints or reproaches, and, amazingly, I did not feel a drop of guilt. On the contrary, I felt my breathing become more regular, as the usual anxiety that hung over Sundays disappeared when I was waiting for my mother's call, as I stopped calculating the budget every month, adjusting it to their needs, not my own. I didn't have to tiptoe anymore to avoid criticism. There was no need to choose words to please. And then, on Tuesday evening, when I had almost finished my business and ordered food, the phone rang. The number was unknown, and, deciding that it was a courier, I answered almost automatically. "Hi, Jada." My mother's voice was immediately recognizable, despite the strange number and the unexpected appearance, and there was some kind of strained playfulness in this greeting, from which I immediately straightened up. "Why aren't you answering our calls?" "What is it?" she asked, as if she didn't understand how easily and why I could break off this contact. "I've blocked your numbers," I explained calmly. "Well, that's a grown-up thing," she grinned, and there was more annoyance than lightness in that laugh. "I'm calling because the money hasn't arrived this month." "Of course not," I replied. "I miss you." She tried to change the subject, to take a step back, but I interrupted her. "Or we can talk directly about money." I canceled the transfers. "You and Dad will have to pay for utilities and groceries yourself." There was a silence that seemed to echo from previous years. "You can't do that. We are counting on this money. You've been getting $1,500 from me every month for 3 years, Mom. That's $54,000. What did you think would happen after you threw my gift in the trash and threatened to sue me?" I was upset. "That's not a reason." "Stop it." she cried. You can't punish us financially because of one small quarrel. It wasn't a small one, I replied without raising my voice, and it wasn't just an argument. That was the last straw. Then she started crying. Loudly, theatrically, with the very sobs that used to work flawlessly on me, causing feelings of guilt, pity, and duty. How are we going to live? Your father's pension is not enough, we have accounts. Jada. I'm sure Mateo and Aurora will eventually step in. They are such caring children. They bought me a car, remember? They have families to support. Am I not? I objected. I'm just a bank, Jada, right? Do I have no needs, no feelings? You're cruel, she said, sobbing, breaking down between the words. No, Mom, I'm being fair for the first time in many years, I replied in a flat, almost emotionless voice, in which there was no anger, only fatigue and determination accumulated over the years. With these words, I pressed the end call button and, without hesitating for a second, blocked the number from which she was calling, as they put the last point in a letter that should have been completed long ago. Then I just stood at the window of my apartment, looking out at the lights of the evening city, and in the reflection of the glass I saw myself, not the one they were used to seeing, but real, free, not tied to an endless series of obligations, not locked in a circle of approval and guilt. Some small part of me, still tinged with the shades of the old, submissive Jada, wondered if I was being too harsh. Did it hurt too much? But the bigger part, the one that remembered how her generous, long, suffering investment in her family had been thrown away without a shadow of a doubt, knew, no, at last I was doing the right thing, and not for someone else, but for myself. The weeks turned into months, and there was something cleansing about the passage of time. Autumn came, bringing with it a cool air that reminded me of the changes, and the trees outside the windows began to shed their leaves, as if they were getting rid of excess, just like me. I hadn't heard from my family since that last call, and I was surprised at how full, eventful, and even happy life could be without the constant background of their voices, requests, reproaches, hints, and expectations. I joined a book club, started hiking on weekends with a small but warm group of new acquaintances, and allowed myself to go on several dates for the first time in my adult life, not thinking about what Mom and Dad would say if they found out that I was wasting my time on nonsense. I started spending my money and my time on myself, on things that brought joy, broadened my horizons, and inspired me, rather than on endless financial transfers to people who for years saw me as nothing more than an ATM with the function of a family therapist. One Saturday morning in November, when the city was just waking up, wrapped in a light fog, the doorbell of my apartment suddenly rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Sometimes the neighbors made mistakes with the delivery, and without thinking, I opened the door without looking through the peephole. My mother was standing in the doorway. She looked smaller and older than I remembered her. Her face was tired, her eyes were reddened, as if from sleepless nights or tears, and her hair, usually styled to a perfect gloss, was now tangled and lifeless. Without waiting for an invitation, she walked past me, as if she was still the mistress of my life, and sat down on the sofa, clutching her purse tightly in her lap. We have problems, Jada, she said, looking straight ahead, not noticing the interior, not trying to pretend that she had come in peace. Serious financial problems. The bank threatens to confiscate property. Something inside me echoed with a faint echo of pity, but I quickly suppressed it, not because there was no compassion, but because I knew that this was once again an attempt to drag me back to where I had so hard to get out of. I'm sorry to hear that, I said honestly. No, you're not, she snapped, her vulnerability instantly giving way to anger. Can't you see how we're struggling while you're living in this fancy apartment with your fancy job? I don't like your pain, Mom, I said calmly, but I'm not responsible for it either. So you're just going to let us drown? After all we've done for you? I sighed and sat down in the chair opposite. What exactly have you done for me lately, Mom? Besides criticizing my career, rejecting my gifts, and trying to manipulate me emotionally and financially? She froze, and something like realization flashed in her eyes, but she quickly pushed it away. "I made a mistake with your birthday present," she admitted reluctantly. "I should have opened it first." "The point is not to open it first," I interrupted gently but firmly, "but that you threw it away without even asking what was inside. And also the way you've treated me for years, not as a daughter, but as a convenient source of money." "It's not true, we love you," she protested, but her words were empty, like a shell without content. "When was the last time your dad thanked me for the money I sent? When was the last time you just called to see how I was doing instead of reminding me about some family meeting or money?" She looked at me for a long time, as if trying to find in my appearance a familiar girl, obedient, always ready to help, but now her gaze slid over the face of a woman who no longer bent under the weight of duty. Suddenly she stood up abruptly, and her voice became harsh, abrupt. "You are an ungrateful daughter, Jada. After everything we've sacrificed for you, then tell me, Mom, at least one sacrifice that you have made for me over the past 5 years. At least one." The question hung in the air, cold and naked, and as I expected, there was no answer. Without saying a word, she grabbed her purse and left, slamming the door so that the glass vase on the shelf almost swayed. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. On the contrary, for the first time in many years, I felt that I was standing firm, not bending under the weight of other people's expectations. The burden that I've been carrying for years, silently, diligently, almost submissively, has finally been lifted from my shoulders. The confrontation that I had always feared happened, and I survived it without succumbing to tricks, without allowing myself to be dragged back into the world where love is measured by the amount of money sent and the degree of compliance. That evening, I called the real estate agent, the same woman who handled the paperwork for the country house when it was still considered an investment project, an attempt to secure her future. I was sitting in the silence of my apartment, warmed by the soft light of a desk lamp, and when I heard her cheerful, businesslike voice on the other end of the line, I said flatly and without hesitation, I decided to keep it for myself. "I'll use it as a weekend getaway." "It's wonderful," she replied with genuine warmth, and there was approval in her voice, as if she was happy for me. "It's such a charming property, you'll enjoy spending time there." "I think it will be," I replied, smiling to myself, feeling the wings slowly but surely spreading inside, straightening the inner spaces narrowed by years of tension. The house, which was supposed to be a generous and symbolic gift to my mother, will now become a gift to me, an act of love, finally directed in my own direction, a symbol of my new beginning, free from old obligations, from deferred dreams, from unrequited expectations. 3 more weeks passed without a single contact with my family, and in this silence, so unusual but not burdened, I felt a strange fullness, as if the air around me had become cleaner, lighter, freer. Christmas decorations began to appear on the streets of the city. Shop windows sparkled with lights of garlands. Christmas trees were put up in cafes, and in the office where I worked, they were already discussing the annual holiday party. I found myself thinking that for the first time in many years, I was looking forward to this season with a light heart, without feeling heavy. I didn't have to anxiously pick up expensive gifts for all family members. I didn't have to prepare for the inevitable comments about my loneliness, about my career, about my wrong path. I spent one weekend in a country house, taking with me everything I needed: cleaning products, a couple of simple pieces of furniture, blankets, dishes. The house turned out to be really warm, despite the cool air outside the windows. Hardwood floors creaked pleasantly underfoot. There was a fireplace in the living room, and a large window let in a sea of daylight. I hung up some of my favorite paintings, put books on the shelves, and planted bulbs in the garden: hyacinths, daffodils, and tulips, that will bloom in spring and become a living reminder of my decision to make this place my own, cozy and real. One evening, when I was about to go to bed, I received a call from my cousin Rachel, the only family member whose contacts I hadn't blocked, mainly because she lived on the other side of the country and almost never interfered with family gossip and drama. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, she said, "I heard what happened." Pause. "Aurora told everyone that you left your family." I laughed, but without mirth. "Of course I did. How are they doing?" I asked. Rachel hesitated a bit before answering. They're fighting. They had to sell the car that Mateo and Aurora had bought. Apparently they were overdue on their mortgage payments. She also let it slip that you were going to give them a house before everything went wrong. It's true. Yes, I said simply. I bought a country house as an investment, but I planned to give it to them for my mom's birthday. I even put the documents and photos in a gift box, but she threw it in the trash without even opening it. Rachel paused for a moment, and I could almost hear her digesting it, the image gathering in her head. Wow. Have you ever thought about making peace with them? I thought about it, trying to be honest with myself. No. I don't think so. I spent years being their financial safety net, receiving only criticism in return. I've had enough. Rachel said softly, just know that Aurora is trying to get everyone to take sides. Some believe in her version of events. But not all of them. I nodded, looking out the window where the lanterns were turning on. I appreciate the warning, I replied, but I'm not worried about family gossip anymore. After the call, I thought about what I had heard for a long time. Are my parents selling a car? It didn't surprise me. They never knew how to handle money. What really surprised me was how little guilt I felt. Previously, I would have immediately opened the banking application, recalculated the balance on the account and thought about how much I could afford to send them. But now, the new Jada knew it wasn't her responsibility. A week later, I ran into Mateo at the grocery store. I was choosing ingredients for a dinner party I was planning for my colleagues, and I was just approaching the cheese counter when I noticed him in the wine department, looking at cheap bottles, clearly confused. Jada, he said, noticing me, and started like a man who saw a ghost. Mateo, I replied dryly, nodding and preparing to walk past, unable to waste energy on unnecessary conversations. Wait, he called. Can we talk for a minute? I stopped, holding the basket at my hip. What about? He looked uncertain, lost. Mom and Dad. They're really struggling. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof due to stress. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and there was no irony or sarcasm in those words, just the calm, balanced sincerity of a man who, despite everything, does not wish his loved ones harm and does not rejoice in their suffering, but at the same time is no longer ready to be their lifeline. They need help, Mateo added, and there was something between desperation and demand in his voice, as if the very fact of our relationship obligated me to open the doors again, not to the house, but to the purse. Financial assistance? I asked, not lowering my gaze, not backing down. And where are you and Aurora in all this? You too bought your mom a car for her birthday. Of course, you can help them with their bills. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly feeling out of place. We have families to support, children, mortgages, he began, as if justifying himself, as if that should explain everything. And I don't? I asked calmly. Is my money just available for grabbing because I'm alone? That's not what I meant, he muttered, but I wasn't going to give him any more room to maneuver. That's exactly what you all always had in mind, I said, and this time my voice was as hard as steel. I turned to leave, but stopped in my tracks and, glancing at him over my shoulder, added, Do you remember what you said when you saw my present in the trash? Looks like your gift found its way home. These words helped me to see you all clearly for the first time. I stopped being a family bank. I left. My heart remained surprisingly calm, and I knew that in the old days such a conversation would have made me tremble, to sleepless nights, tearing my soul between guilt and duty. But now I only felt confident that I had chosen the right path. That evening, when my friends, people whom I myself had led into my life not by blood, but by a spiritual connection, gathered at my dining table, laughing, sharing stories, sipping wine and tasting dishes that I had prepared with love and inspiration, I realized that I had created my own family, founded by not based on coercion and expectations, but on mutual respect and sincere affection. To new beginnings, said my friend Terrera, raising her glass. "Beyond the borders," I added, clinking glasses with her. The next day, I received an official letter from the law firm representing my parents. It stated that I had made a legally binding promise to transfer the country house to them, and now I must either fulfill the transfer of ownership or pay compensation. I forwarded the letter to my company's legal department, one of the few corporate privileges for which I was particularly grateful. By the end of the week, my lawyer sent an official reaction: "A gift that was not handed over and accepted cannot be considered legally binding." Moreover, I had photographic evidence that the box of documents had been thrown away, which was clearly interpreted as a rejection of the offer. That's all I've heard from their lawyer. Winter was gaining momentum, and I settled into my new, finally calm, ordinary everyday life. Weekdays in a city apartment and weekends in a country house, where snow fell on the roof like a soft, silent blanket, and in the morning the air rang with silence. I took a dog, an affectionate cross between a retriever from a local shelter, and named her Clara. She loved running around the yard, burying her nose in the snow, enjoying every day as if everything had happened for the first time. I joined a community garden near my home, where I learned how to care for native plants, and spend hours digging in the ground, listening to the world freeze around me. I went on several dates with a literature professor who lived in the same town where my country house was located. He was gentle in words and attentive in gestures, talked about Shakespeare, recited poetry by heart, and knew how to keep silent so that it seemed like a conversation. I didn't miss emptying my bank account every month. I didn't miss the Sunday phone calls, which left me feeling like something was wrong with me. I didn't miss having to guess my mother's mood like a minefield, and I didn't feel nostalgic for the jealousy and passive aggression from my siblings. What was most surprising was the speed with which the guilt disappeared. All my life, I've been taught to believe that family is sacred, and it should come first, no matter what the cost, even if it was all me. Finding a gift made with love and hope in the trash can was the very moment when the internal structure, which had been maintained for so long out of a sense of duty, collapsed like a house of cards. Rachel wrote to me that my parents are now considering moving into an apartment, and that Mateo and Aurora are fighting over who should help more and who should help less. And for the first time, none of this made me feel anxious, annoyed, or eager to intervene. It wasn't my problem anymore. Someone might find me cold or insensitive for cutting ties with my family. Perhaps that's the way it is in their value system. But after years of using it, tacit acceptance, and a lack of real gratitude, I finally realized a simple truth: sometimes the most liberating thing you can do is walk away. Write a comment on what you think about this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.